Just a short drive south of San Francisco, there is a beautiful place with scenery and amazing architecture, almost giving visitors the impression that they have been magically transported into another country entirely. This is Capitola, one of California's most unusual hidden treasures, and according to some, it's at the risk of destruction by the elements. So how did this small beachside village come to be? And more importantly, what might come of it? Stay tuned to find out, as today we discover the story of Capitola. I'm your host Ryan Sokash, and you're watching It's History. What we now call Capitola was initially inhabited by the Ohlone tribe. In fact, the tribe inhabited most of the Bay Area before the Spanish Empire's arrival in the 16th century, as well as their expansion throughout the 17th. Critical documentation of this tribe began in 1776 when Catholic missions in the Bay Area intended to make them loyal members of the Spanish Empire and Church, and hence they were baptized in the San Francisco, Santa Clara, and San Jose missions, a practice that was carried out well into the mid-19th century. From there, the first village in modern Capitola was built in 1791 by the Spanish as they were establishing missions and colonies to control the Pacific coast and the Ohlone. In fact, the original native village dated back over 1,000 years before the Spanish arrived, but it wouldn't survive their colonization of the region. Later, as the Spanish Empire declined, Mexico would take over the area and renamed it SoCal Rancho. Then, after the Mexican-American War, California was incorporated as an American state in 1850, officially making Capitola an American village. And so it was. Capitola became a part of Santa Cruz County under the new, broader arrangements, quickly attracting American settlers to expand the lands and riches of the United States. After this, one of the most prominent settlers was a German immigrant, Frederick Hihn. Born in Holzminden, he was educated as a merchant, but like many others of the day, he was attracted to California in light of the 1848 gold rush. Alongside were his two brothers. Either through mining or his family's wealth, he had enough money to open a candy factory and store until a flood in the river destroyed that venture as well. Anyhow, from there, he moved to Sacramento to open a drugstore until that too, unfortunately, was killed by the two fires of 1851, striking him in May and June. This was a disastrous situation, as everything that Hihn had was destroyed after that June 22nd blaze, and he was so broke by the loss of his business that he considered returning to his native land of Germany, recalling, quote, "I was on my way to the ship as a sailor, to work for my passage. I passed by where my drugstore was on Washington Street and found my old neighbor, clearing the coals from his place. I pulled my hat down over my eyes, saying, 'What a coward I am.' I looked no further for a vessel to go home on." Damaged but not broken by the fires, he found his friend and business partner, Ernest Kunitz, and accepted a job at his Sacramento soap factory to rebuild himself until a new opportunity would appear. Not content to work as a soap salesman, he found another Swiss businessman to partner with who helped him to relocate to a less dangerous and potentially more profitable part of the state. The two originally planned to open a shop in San Antonio, but would split up after a series of mistakes and accidents drove Hihn to relocate to Santa Cruz. The move to this much smaller community was so outrageous that his companion, Hench, agreed to join his new venture. And so the two set up shop in Santa Cruz at a time when no more than 700 people populated that settlement. When Hihn and Hench arrived, the small town mainly consisted of farmers and lumber workers, split between the coastal plains and the foot of the mountains. He and Hench moved into a vacant general store in the center of the town, and although Hench would eventually move away with his wife, Hihn's store prospered well enough for him to eventually build a 2-floor expansion to the store for his business and residence. His fluency in English, French, German, and Spanish meant that he could do business with any incoming settlers as well as local Californians. As the population of San Francisco grew, the demand of Santa Cruz farmers and lumberjacks did so as well. Eventually, this made Hihn the primary buyer, as it was Hihn that would have the wheat milled, potatoes sold, and lumber cut, supplying the needs of the burgeoning San Francisco. And with this newfound influence, Hihn was eventually secure and wealthy enough to begin buying the area's remaining land. He bought massive tracts of land in the forest and coastal plain, developing new farms, lumber yards, and a railway to access all of those facilities, plus the surrounding cities. He eventually moved on to opening roads, and this made passage through the area easier, a fact which almost immediately attracted new buyers. This and his lenient policies on installment plans for the plots of the land he sold off to new settlers proved worth the cost, even if buyers died before their debt was paid. This system of selling the land and materials to new settlers is what built Capitola from 1868 onward. But to clarify, in the beginning it was not as dense as the imagery we see today. Rather, Capitola began as a tent camp near the river, led by S.A. Hall, a contractor intending to settle down as a farmer. But according to most sources, it was probably his daughter Lulu who named their camp Capitola. Well, they eventually moved on. Visitors from across the state came here year after year in the summer to escape the interior's blistering heat. A fact keenly noticed by Hihn, who worked on some developments for the beachfront properties until he died in 1913, at which point his daughter inherited the land before selling it to San Francisco businessman Henry Respite. Respin's first addition to Capitola was his 22-room, 9,000-square-foot mansion on Wharf Road. It included the latest plumbing and electrical innovations, a concealed wine cellar, and an actual secret vault hidden behind a bookcase in the library. After his showpiece was finished, he began working on improving the roads and the Central Hotel, adding a movie theater, bowling alley, and other concessions for the more wealthy summer visitors. And then he moved onto his golden project, one that would quickly and permanently distinguish Capitola from anywhere else in California. Respin's mansion was already considered to have the air of a Spanish castle jetting out over the bluff, which would undoubtedly inform his design philosophies in the future. Knowing that their tourist season in the summer was unpredictable and volatile, Respin wanted to make Capitola a year-round community, and hence he put together a new team, an investor and architect, Wolf and Higgins, to design new tiered Venetian-style houses with flat roofs, parapet walls, and various paint colors between houses to increase their image of individuality. This reflection of Spanish, colonial, Mediterranean design cemented the town's legacy well into today, especially since many of the original buildings have been preserved. The timing was perfect. The presence of decent roads and railway access, drafted up by Hihn and his partners, had finally lined up with the widespread adoption of the Model T and other family motor cars, giving regular Californians access to the seaside retreat year-round. Visits by families of middle and upper-class roots increased throughout the year, culminating in Respin's massive auctioning of lots and fresh bungalows in May of 1924. So many people were enticed by this offer that their 100 by 40-foot auction tent couldn't even accommodate the turnout. But unfortunately, we now know what they couldn't have. The Roaring Twenties wouldn't last forever. First, flooding tore apart much of the Esplanade in 1926, and after Prohibition came into effect, the town became known for its incredibly high number of arrests for drunken disorder. These issues were then exacerbated by Respin's risky investments and failure to meet promises of water and gas infrastructure for every new home. And by the following large auction in 1929, even Respin's own personal mansion was up for sale to, quote, convert all the property to cash in 10 days. They managed to sell off many of the lots, as well as the new golf club, but after the financial disputes with his partners, Respin completely disappeared from California in 1931. In fact, his name would only reappear upon his death in 1947. His mansion was briefly owned until the 50s by a group of nuns, then followed by a revolving door of homeless living in the building, a state of affairs that caused the city council to threaten its demolition if it wasn't sealed off, with its interior ripped out. The mansion is hollow on the inside, but is structurally stable and a preserved landmark. Despite all of Respin's failings as a developer, he finished Hihn's work, cementing Capitola as a gateway venue for Californians and many other visitors. The unique Mediterranean stylings, Sandy beaches and pristine blend of river and canal features offered plenty of unique travel opportunities for travelers without even needing to leave the state. But even in the face of these luxuries, the area has hardly had it easy since then. You see, the Pacific coast is known for its harsh, sometimes unpredictable storms, and as you'll see in a moment, Capitola is unfortunately no exception. The city of Capitola has established a record for every storm and disaster that has hit the city since a flood in 1791 that destroyed the Santa Cruz mission. That registry is 32 pages long. It includes earthquakes, tsunamis, high tides, windstorms, and even catalogs when eroding beaches become risky to nearby homes and businesses. Some of these were minor events that caused only limited damages and injuries. But then, more notably, there are the others, like those in 1949 and 1953, when surf reached between 18 and 30 feet in height. Imagine that. Events like this bring ramifications such as the destruction of property, the drowning of surfers, as well as the loss of the harbor pier. Anyhow, in the 1950s, flooding washed away several cabins that wound up being jammed into the pilings of the SoCal Drive Bridge. When the pressure from the impact and the water became unbearable, part of the bridge collapsed and was lost to the rushing water below, resulting in over $1 million in damages to property and infrastructure. Apparently, at the time, it was still common for residents and visitors to dispose of trash by just throwing it over the cliffs, creating unsanitary conditions in the water and attracting rodents who burrowed into the cliffs where trash gathered and contributed to erosion. In the 60s, erosion would get worse as storms and construction caused parts of Grand Avenue to just be washed off altogether. Well, the city planned to condemn a 24-unit apartment building that was precariously close to eroding off the cliff face. The tenants disputed this, and the matter just got worse. Despite the city's efforts to build a new seawall, erosion eventually reached under parts of the building in the 1980s, resulting in mandatory demolition for safety purposes. And it was around this time in 1984 that a creative solution was proposed and then ultimately used with the support of county planner Susan Tupper. You see, artificial seaweed was installed around the waterline to stall the erosion of the main cliff face. This floating plastic web was anchored and intended to catch and gather sand as it drifted during regular storm tides. If the plan worked, eventually a new artificial beach would be created without the need for dredging. Unfortunately, that too was washed away in the next major storm, causing a complete failure of the plan in its infancy. By then, about 2 feet of the cliff face had disappeared yearly. Then, somewhat recently, in January of 2023, Capitola was hit repeatedly by severe storms. One pier of the wharf was ripped off and thrown back into the city with so much force that it went through the windows of the boarded-up Zelda's Beach restaurant. Co-owner Josh Whitby described it as the worst storm to hit the area since 1983 and attested that the damage was far worse. Regardless, he looked forward with optimism as a news crew interviewed him and volunteers who were cleaning the restaurant, hoping to reopen. He recalled, quote, "The community comes together. Capitola is great for that. Everybody is down here. The businesses are all working together to help make everything work." The truth of the matter is that Capitola is at the mercy of the Pacific. And let me give you a little context as to just what that means. Historically speaking, it was said that when Ferdinand Magellan sailed his remaining fleet around the tip of South America, his men broke and demoralized from their perils so far in the journey, the captain elected to name the, quote, new ocean the Pacific, a name chosen to inspire notions of peace and confidence in his men. According to his logic, the ocean itself must be pleasant if the crossing was so terrible. Now, whether that kind of ludicrous idea worked or not is up to you to decide, but history has proven him to be decisively wrong. The Pacific is a land of volcanoes, typhoons, freak waves, and almost all of the largest earthquakes in history. If anything, the Pacific Ocean is the meanest body of water on the planet, and Capitola has a way of illustrating that point. Despite the beauty and hospitality of the area, it has been fighting the ocean for decades. Despite many clever and industrious efforts, they've been losing. Capitola Beach and cliff erosion was the subject of multiple scientific journals I found in the early process of researching for this episode. And while the techniques of fighting it probably belong to other channels, I will say that the sheer volume of weathering facing this area is obvious. Humans have a habit of either picking fights with nature intentionally or subconsciously. Sometimes we actually win, but many other times, most other times, we end up trying to control forces far beyond our abilities and tools. I don't know what Capitola's future holds, but if the predictions of climate activists prevail, it may not survive forever. But rather than going forward, I'll leave climate change as a topic for you to discuss in the comment section below. I look forward to seeing your thoughts. Oh, and one more thing on a somewhat unrelated matter. My wife and I recently recreated and taste tested the last meal of President Abraham Lincoln on our new channel, Eats History. Click right here to check that out. Otherwise, until next time, I'm Ryan Socash, signing off.